Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Women Veterans Alliance. This is our Wednesday webinar series. I'm Melissa Washington. I am the CEO and founder of Women Veterans Alliance. And again, welcome you all to our webinar. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are a nationwide organization with our primary focus is to connect women veterans with each other and resources. And we do that through our online and in-person networking and events. And this is one of the ways that we connect women veterans with resources is through our webinar series. So again, very happy to have you all here. If you are on social media and if you're not connected with us, please feel free to connect with us on different social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and LinkedIn, and also on YouTube. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This webinar will be uploaded to YouTube, and you can watch our previous webinars on our YouTube channel as well. And if there is of interest of becoming a Women Veterans Alliance paid member, we are still having our membership promo, but you will need to email me to receive the information on becoming a member. There are a lot of benefits when it comes to becoming a member of Women Veterans Alliance. And if you haven't heard, or if you've heard about Women Veterans Magazine, it's our newest publication. We recently launched the California edition. We are working on Texas, Florida, and DMV, and we'll be working on some additional states as well. Right now for Florida, DMV, and Texas, our deadline is this Friday to submit any photos, articles. We are looking for any published authors that are from this state or these states or had been stationed in these states. As well as looking for advertisers for the publication. So if it is something of interest to you, visit the website or just send me an email. We do have some upcoming other Wednesday webinars the rest of this month. As you'll see next Wednesday, we have Yolanda Hagen, who's a retired Air Force veteran, who is the Women Veterans Program Manager, and she's going to be talking about the VA healthcare. And then the following week, we have Beth Ball, who's a Navy veteran, and she is with the USA Hockey Warriors and is going to talk about their program. And then follow that, we also have Brene Brooks, who's Air Force veteran, and she's going to talk about most common disabilities among women veterans. So those are upcoming events. You can visit our website and go to click on webinars, and you can sign up for all of those for the rest of the month of May. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter, Jennifer Volprek. She is a Marine Corps veteran and a former combat aviator who's owner and primary consultant at J Vollbrecht Consulting, Inc. She has built a network of expert consultants with primary experience working in Department of Energy and Department of Defense industry. She believes that leadership required to move an organization forward is a position of respect that is always earned and never given. She is a leader in her industry and has dedicated her research to female veteran entrepreneurs. So without further ado, Jennifer, you can go ahead and take it away, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. First of all, thank you for having me on this platform. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And so second of all, to the participants, thank you all for coming today. I'm really excited to chat with you all. I do want to have this be an interactive conversation. The only thing that I do ask is that you allow me to get through the slides. So hold questions if you can. If I go too fast or if you're confused, please feel free to use the chat. I do have it open and I'll try to respond. And Melissa's also going to help me to monitor the chat. So that's how this is going to go. And with that, you should be seeing my slides in presentation mode. And this is an adaptation from my dissertation. And so I'm completing an executive doctorate in business administration from St. Mary's of California. And this was the topic of my research, was female veteran entrepreneurs balancing feminine and masculine roles. And so Melissa has already gone over this part, but I'll tell you a little bit more about me. So I did serve in the Marine Corps from 2004 to 2009, and I was a helicopter crew chief and door gunner on CH-46 helicopters. It was an amazing experience. I deployed to Iraq in 2005, from 2005 to 2006. And when I got out in 2009, so I live in the Central Valley in California. I went to work for a defense contractor. And so I've built my skill set and network there from transitioning out of the Marine Corps into the defense industry, and then getting around to the Department of Energy, and now where I'm operating my business. It's really been a fun journey since getting out and building my professional portfolio. On a personal note, I am an avid reader of military history. I love reading about World War II from every perspective. You see all the books behind me. A lot of them are firsthand accounts of wars and conflicts. And because I love to know from a firsthand perspective about human nature and human resilience, one thing that I'm very interested in is studying contrast. So, not conflicting stereotypes or female veterans in a masculine institution and things like that. They really pique my interest. So that's why I chose to study this topic. So I started off with a basic research question, and again with a lens in uncovering some contrast. But also, I noticed that the body of research related to female veterans in general is often related to disability status. There's a huge emphasis on post-traumatic stress. There's a huge emphasis on needs for healthcare, and those are all very important topics. But I also found that there are a lot of topics that are yet to be explored. Related to female veterans, and entrepreneurship was one of them. And so I went in head first on that angle. Things in the future that I'm interested in looking at is female veterans who enter into motherhood. That's another area of contrast. And so specifically, I'm looking at success factors rather than what resources can we provide for those who are struggling. And so I went in it from that angle, saying, hey, what are your greatest successes? And then I tried to compile all the results and come up with some themes that were important to the success of an entrepreneur. So throughout my talk, I am going to mention quite a few terminologies. And so I just wanted to make sure upfront that we're on the same page in terms of what these things mean. So a masculine institution, in my definition, requires members to have risk-taking traits. Those are masculine traits, and risk-taking, assertiveness, strength. Those are pretty widely adopted definitions. And so in this context, the military is a masculine institution, and entrepreneurship is also a masculine institution. Also, in that light, society in the United States, that's kind of a big thing to think about, but society in the United States is feminine by definition. A veteran, obviously, a lot of us on the call know that definition well, but is defined as a person who served in the active military, naval or air service, and was discharged or released. So that's a veteran. We also talk about personal identity. And so that's a continuum. And it's something that comes from internal. It's not how I'm externally perceived. It's how I perceive myself. It is a continuous process. And so that's also something to be aware of, is that, if I perceive myself today as a Marine, that eventually, as I progress and grow as a human being, then my personal identity shifts, and then I become a veteran. And then I also adopt the personal identity of an entrepreneur, and sometimes going back and forth between those different roles. So it's something that is constantly shifting and changing as we grow as a person. Veteran identity is a subset of personal identity, and it describes how veterans perceive themselves. And found a lot of information about how the general public, while now in today's time in 2022, in general, we are appreciated for the service, that there's also just the caveat that only a small member of society actually serves in the military, and that a civilian may not be able to specifically understand the experiences, the lived experiences of a veteran. So veteran identity is another topic that's introduced. Lastly, this was a new word that I learned through my research, and I really liked it, and I liked the definition. So liminality is a word that describes when a person is in a state of in between. And so that's when I get out of the military and I'm not quite a civilian and I'm not in the military anymore, and I'm in a state of in between, or I'm changing identities. So that's what we mean by liminality. Finally, an entrepreneur is, this is a little bit more of a broad term, and so I had to really hone it in. An entrepreneur is someone who owns a business, which has been operational, paying wages, and breaking even for less than 3.5 years. So that's the way that I put the bookends on what an entrepreneur is, and fully acknowledge and appreciate that there are other adaptations of those terms of an entrepreneur. But for the sake of this presentation and this research, that is my definition. So I set out to study female veteran entrepreneurs, and I kind of tried to put it into a perspective of the yellow is the female veteran entrepreneurs. And if you take a step back, the purple is the reality of, okay, there's not that much research about this population. A lot of the research that is published is related to stigma. There's a long losing of your personal identity or your purpose while transitioning. That's something that is well researched. Another factor that came up was the transition out of the military being more difficult than expected. So female veteran entrepreneurs, or female veterans in general, are faced with a myriad of issues when they get out of the military. And along those lines, the other boxes out there, those kind of frame where my research fits in. And this is just a fun graphic. This is a word cloud that is comes from the abstract of my paper. So it just tells you what the paper is about. It's about entrepreneurs. It's about identity, military. So the bigger the word, the more often it's used. So that's how that works out. This one, I'm not going to go too into depth on this because this is not an academic talk. This is a webinar, but there was something that I found that was very interesting. When we study veterans, a lot of the research, not all of it, but a lot, is focused on transition theory. So transitioning out of the military and into society. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at this through the lens of boundary theory, which in my definition is longer. It's not just during the transition, but it actually is, your whole life. As women, we're always going from one identity to another. We're at work and then we're at home, and we have to be two different people in those scenarios. So it's a constant switching and changing of personal identities and roles. And another interesting aspect of boundary theory is that we become overly tainted by a previous experience. So how often have you run into a veteran who served many, many years ago and is still very heavily associated with their military identity? That's something that's very interesting. And then finally, those blurred boundaries. When you blur those boundaries, where being in the military and being a civilian is not that different from your own perspective, and you're able to blur that boundary, that you might actually be able to transition easier from those two different roles. And so as I went through my literature review, there was a common theme that not only gender studies with relation to female veterans were lacking in literature. So we haven't really been explored that much in research. It's only in the past 10 or 15 years that that gender is even mentioned as a topic in most military related or veteran related research papers. And surprisingly, I didn't find a single study that was dedicated solely to female veteran entrepreneurs. I did find a few that were related to veteran entrepreneurs, and the gender portion of that I did use pretty heavily, but nothing was dedicated solely to female veteran entrepreneurs. And so I thought that was interesting. I'm not going to go over all of these literature reviews in depth, but this is how I road mapped my literature review. And so I dove really deep into all of these topics, the veteran issues. What are the stigmas? What are we running into? What's holding us back? And then veteran identity is how do we perceive ourselves? I also went very deep into masculinity and femininity and what is that as applied to a society, as applied to an organization, and also as applied to an individual. And so I have some scales that I applied that they're personal scales. You answer a series of questions and it says, okay, right now you're falling on the feminine side, or right now you're falling on the masculine side. And those are some pretty widely adopted scales. Social categorization and liminality. That's when I talked about being stuck in a transition or being in a state of in between. I found a ton of literature, really great literature on entrepreneurship and gender, not specific to being a veteran. And then finally, I found a couple of surveys that were interesting on veteran entrepreneurs. And again, those were not specific to females, but there was some very interesting information that I was able to leverage in the study. So I will go a little bit deeper on liminality because there's some, there's some unique factors that I thought were interesting. There's different stages of liminality, and there's a couple of examples that I went through, and one that stuck with me has nothing to do with being a veteran, but one that stuck with me that's just a really great way to describe liminality is converting to a religion. And it was a great story about there was some researchers who they did a deep dive into this this church, and people were trying to convert to Christianity, but they never were quite converted, right? They would go home and life would get in the way and their family members would get in the way. And so there was a constant quest to make that transition, but it was prolonged. And interestingly, in this particular study, it was not done in the United States, but there was an effort by that specific church to capitalize on that state of in-betweenness and, sell products that were related to, we'll help you convert, or, if you drink this holy water and buy it from us, then you can be a better Christian. And so that was just really interesting how the phases of liminality, there was an awareness of them and there was also a capitalization upon it. And so that piqued my interest because there's so many resources that get thrown at us as female veterans. And as I'm studying this population as an insider, it gave me a lot of perspective into, how to really use the right resources and really how to flush out which ones are really good and which ones are capitalizing maybe on that transition. And so I thought that was extremely relevant. There was also another story about liminality, which resonated with me. And it was a ROTC student who went to officer candidate school. And a lot of his classmates or cohort mates were calling themselves airmen before it was time, before they had graduated, and he felt like he hadn't quite earned the title yet. And so there was that state of in-betweenness too, where I'm headed in a direction, but I'm not there yet. And I'm not going to acknowledge that I'm there yet until I complete this transition, or until I complete the course, if you will. And so finally, the female veteran entrepreneurs, that's a unique area. It's a very unique little tiny niche in the research. And it's unique because there's more than one transition that's being explored, right? There's the transition out of the military and into society. We enter society and then we say, okay, I'm going to become an entrepreneur now. And so then I transition from a feminine society back into another masculine institution of entrepreneurship, where we're risk-taking and we're being assertive again, as a role. And in this case, it's voluntary. So I'm also assuming that the joining of the military was voluntary in this case. And then also that joining the entrepreneurship is voluntary. So we're choosing to join those two institutions. So entrepreneurship is a masculine institution. It's very widely adopted in the research. Lots of different sources. A couple of the real interesting factors was these studies that say that masculinity entrepreneurship puts women into a gender bending profession, just simply by choosing to participate. Women have to subscribe to the masculine to be accepted as an entrepreneur, and yet they cannot abandon their feminine. And so to me, that sounds like I might need to blur my boundaries in the boundary theory, and it sounds like I might be in a state of liminality where I'm trying to figure out how do I adjust to this lifestyle. There's also a body of research around gender and entrepreneurship that says that women are destined to walk a line between ultimate failure to subscribe to the masculine. And that study also suggests that women who fail to adopt masculinity will also fail at entrepreneurship. Now that's pretty bold, and maybe that's not 100% true. That if you don't adapt, you will fail, but it is the majority. And just a side note is that this isn't only entrepreneurship, this also applies to managers, that women managers are also judged on a masculine scale. So as we move up in our professional careers into either entrepreneurship or management, there is a tendency to where your role swings pretty heavily into those masculine traits. And so there were a couple of surveys that were performed on the veteran entrepreneurship population. And the only thing that I'm going to hone in on here is that of the over 2,000 participants, is that 27% of the entire population of respondents were female veteran entrepreneurs. And that's interesting because females only make up 9% of the total veteran population. And so there's a much higher than our population percentage of respondents. And maybe females respond to surveys more often than males, but there's a second one, another dissertation about veteran entrepreneurs. So this is separate from the Syracuse study. This is another dissertation where they surveyed 524 entrepreneurs, and 30% of the total sample was female veteran entrepreneurs. And I thought this was interesting because the author in his write-up said, I must have made a mistake when I was collecting data, and somehow I skewed my population so that all these female veteran entrepreneurs were responding at a greater rate than male veteran entrepreneurs. And in this case, he also sampled non-veteran male and female entrepreneurs. And so he thought that it was an anomaly and that it was a mistake and maybe he should do it again. But I'm suggesting, because there's two surveys that have this same phenomenon, that actually maybe female veterans are becoming entrepreneurs at a higher rate than their male veteran counterparts, and also higher than their non-veteran counterparts. So that was interesting. The author also suggested that a mixed methods approach might be interesting to approach the veteran entrepreneurs and dive deeper. So mixed methods is when you mix qualitative. For me, I mixed qualitative and quantitative. So I did interviews, and then I also performed a survey. I did this in 3 phases. The first thing I did was an observation of female veteran entrepreneurs in the wild. And in the wild is loosely defined as, I was attending a couple of conferences. I did attend the Women Veterans Alliance Unconference. And then I also attended a conference with Syracuse University that was all focused on veteran entrepreneurship. And so I took my notes, my field notes from those conferences, and then use those to formulate my questions, my interview questions. And I interviewed 8 female veteran entrepreneurs and talked to them about their personal identity and what their greatest successes were and what their greatest struggles were and what resources they would that they found most useful. And then I asked them, what advice would you give to a woman who's in the military who's thinking about entrepreneurship? And so I did those interviews, and then I went into phase 3, which was a survey. And so that was quantitative. And that survey, it was the same. I used the same questions, the open-ended questions. And then I applied what's called the BEM sex role inventory. And that's the scaled feminine, masculine quiz that it asks you a series of questions. And then it pops out and says, okay, you as an individual today fall on this side of the scale. And there's four possible solutions. You can be feminine, you can be masculine, you can be androgynous, which is pretty much equally both feminine and masculine. And then there was a 4th option where it's undefined. You're just all over the map, and we don't know what you are or where you subscribe. So I got a lot of data. I attended those 2 conferences. I did my interviews and the surveys. And then the results. So this is the interesting part. We did the 8 one-on-one interviews and then 19 survey responses. And what we came up with was somewhat not surprising, but also gives us a roadmap. The identity related to the military community found that, to no surprise, that female veterans have a strong affinity to the military community, and that there is a need to impact the military community. So not only am I going to be part of the club, but based on my own experiences, I think that that club can do better. And that was the theme of needing to impact the military community. And I want to make it easier for females or just veterans in general during their transition out of the military. Combating invisibility. That wasn't something that I set out to study and didn't know that it was going to pop up in the results, but I did find that invisibility of no one thinks I'm a veteran, or people don't recognize me as having served, is that your husband's unit, that type of thing. So combating invisibility, that came up pretty heavily as a theme. And then finally, balancing identities. And did find that a lot of my participants reported burnout in their efforts to try and balance those identities, so that it's exhausting. And I'll go on. So the theme 1, there's a couple of quotes down there in the italics. I wanted to help my fellow veterans, and every day I'm proud. So I'm proud of being a veteran. A couple of the participants talked about when she lived near an Air Force installation, or it might have even been a Navy installation. And every time the jets fly over, I feel proud. So that's on a daily basis, right? I'm always connecting with my veteran identity. My neighbors are veterans and they appreciate me. The last one, I guess, is those times when people say, I appreciate you. She talked about being in a grocery store and using her USAA card or Navy Federal debit card and getting recognized for her service that way. And so a lot of the women, or all of the women, I'll say, that I surveyed and that I spoke with, they could name myriad of reasons and myriad of examples about how they had a positive identity. It wasn't just an affinity, but a positive identity related to having served in the military. A lot of the business owners, so all the women that I talked to were entrepreneurs, and many of them did offer free or discounted services to fellow veterans, or their businesses were focused and founded on the principles of serving veterans, from staffing companies to training companies where they're training veterans and deploying them into the workforce. There were some that had nonprofits and business accelerators that they had founded that are specifically geared towards helping veterans. And so we've seen a lot of that pop up in recent years. those types of resources that are aimed at veterans. And so our population, the female veteran entrepreneurs, are heavily involved in those efforts. Combating invisibility. So like I mentioned earlier, it's not something that I intended to set out in research. But many of the participants expressed the purpose for their involvement in the nonprofits and in their business models, was ensuring that female veterans were able to tell their stories. And so in my dissertation, one of the things it did make me chuckle was that the female veteran entrepreneurs wanted to tell their stories. And in one of my comments that I received from one of my reviewers was, this section is way too long, the stories. This section is way too long, you need to cut it down. And my response was, no, not cutting it down. I don't care if 2 people read this, their whole story is published. And so that was something that I was very proud of. And so here we go, tying back into the theoretical lens, is that constant state of liminality, or crossing those boundaries. It was something of interest to the participants, and they recounted their transition with great detail. And it didn't matter how long ago it had been that they had transitioned out of the military. There was some really great detail about that transition and what the struggles were and what the successes were related to their transition. Also, the story of transitioning into entrepreneurship. The participants were very eager to tell their story about how they built their business from the ground up, and all the struggles and almost failing or having to pivot in great detail. Finally, in the spirit of balancing, the majority of the participants did describe burnout, and there was a very distinct correlation with age and ability to set boundaries. So what I'm saying here is that the older that we get, or the more mature that we get, or the more experience we have in burning ourselves out from trying to manage everything from all angles at home and at work, is that we do get better at establishing those boundaries as a defense mechanism, right? Because we've all been there where we've just been completely burnt out, not able to function. And so I also try to make some implications or suggestions for future research, is catching that sooner. How do we apply that and catch that sooner so that we can prevent those extreme burnouts related to being in multiple roles all at the same time, and pass that on to our next generation. So in summary, there's very few studies out there, and there are some recent studies that just came out, and some other members of the Women Veterans Alliance who shared their research with me specifically about women veterans transitioning out of the military and just into civilian life, from female veterans getting their first job, whole research studies about that, so entering the workforce. But there's still many opportunities for future research amongst this population. And so I'm just looking out to carve out my little area of research in entrepreneurship, gender, and veterans. It would also be interesting to investigate how others perceive female veteran entrepreneurs. So I studied how the female veteran entrepreneurs perceive themselves. And so I'm also suggesting that we come at that from the other angle. If you work with or know or do business with female veteran entrepreneurs, what is the perception there? Further research into the types of businesses and community impacts of these businesses. So I had a thought that over the course of the years, a female veteran entrepreneur or a female veteran nonprofit owner, in measuring those community impacts that come from an insider and targeting their own population in a longitudinal approach, so covering several years. I thought that would be very interesting. And then finally, a longitudinal study, which Syracuse University is attempting to collect this data, but again, it's not focused on females. It is focused on the veteran, and actually it's the military connected community in their survey. So that includes veteran spouses and military spouses and veterans. But this that I'm suggesting is a longitudinal study, specifically female veteran entrepreneurs, all the way through the process from ideation, launch, growth, and exit, and understanding that from a female veteran entrepreneur's point of view. So that concludes my presentation today, the implications for the future research. And so now I'm wondering if anybody has any questions or clarifications or discussions.
And if anybody like, you could unmute yourself, or you can use the chat box. This was fantastic, Jennifer. And I know this is like you cut everything down from a 2-hour presentation to this, and I'm glad that you just focused on women veterans, because one of my issues is a lot of times they bring in the military spouse women with us. So it's great that you just focused on us. But also too, taking a look, you talked about like what this can mean going further. It's like, okay, looking at the women entrepreneurship, the different traits, which is interesting, but also too, when it comes to funding, there's so many things that this can lead to, right? Whether you go from that piece, go back, or go from what you've started going forward of the whole business aspect of women and, business to the government, B2B, B2C, and all these different things. So, I would love to hear from others that are here on the call, because I'm sure we have other women entrepreneurs, small business owners, and we do have something in the chat.
Yeah, so it's related to the title. What is your title after I'm not an entrepreneur anymore as you graduate, right? And then now I'm a business owner, and now I'm managing an operational business.
That's a good point too, because that's always, it's like, what is the difference between entrepreneur and a business owner, and can you be both? And right, and it's like, where did we start? Do we start out as owning business? Do we start as entrepreneur? Can we always be an entrepreneur?
Exactly. And that definition, like I said, that it's not a clear-cut definition. That's just the one that I adopted, because there were so many to choose from. And so you had to put some brackets around it in order to do the research. But I agree, an entrepreneur, you can be an entrepreneur inside of an organization, right? And have great ideas and spin off different process improvements and things like that. So entrepreneur is a very broadly defined term.
Anybody else? Any comments, questions? Again, feel free to unmute or type in the chat. So I had another question for you, Jennifer. So is your study, is that available for the public to see? How does that work?
Sure. So not yet. It's in the process of being fully edited by myself, with the incorporating all the inputs from my team and my committee. And then once we get it finalized and packaged up, it will be published. And so when it becomes published, Melissa, I'll definitely share it with you. And I'll share it with my network as well. I expect that it'll happen this year. The publishing process is not very fast. I will be complete and defended before this summer. And so I'll be done with the research, and then we just have to wait for the publishing process to run its course.
Well, since we still have a few minutes, on just another side note topic to share. So share everybody a little bit about your business as a small business owner, former entrepreneur.
Yes, actually. So I, on the 1st of this month, the 1st of May, we celebrated our 3rd year in business. So J Vollbrecht Consulting is 3 years old. And so we provide project management and project controls services to the government. And it's been a lot of fun. I support Currently, I support 6 national laboratories and 2 private-public partnerships, and we have 6 employees, and hopefully continuing to build that team. I have a few new team members in my queue, and I've just been having a lot of fun learning, making every mistake in the book related to back office, related to business development. I just kind of started from scratch because it sounded interesting to me, and project management is my area of expertise. And so we get called in as subject matter experts to come in and either deliver a project on behalf of the government, or a lot of times it's to come in and mentor the program managers and the project managers, and to ensure that they are able to deliver the project seamlessly and continue their own personal and professional development. So that's how my team engages.
Okay, one last, so if you want to do the plugs, it's going to be announced tomorrow, and I'm sure hopefully we have some other women business owners on here, or someone looking to start a business. You want to give them a preview, or just share with them a little bit more about what we're going to be announcing tomorrow?
Yes, that's great. Sneak peek. So tomorrow we'll be announcing the Melissa Washington Small Business Award for 2022. I was the 2020 recipient of the award, and it helped my business tremendously. I won the grant. There's a really funny story about it, because we were in the middle of the pandemic and we were on Zoom, where normally this is presented in person, but I had also moved that day. So the address that was in my application did not match my physical location. And so there was a whole mix up as Melissa tried to deliver the check to me, but that's besides the point. I used the grant funds to hire transitioning military members through the Skill Bridge program, and help to pay for their project management professional certifications, so that they would go on to have long, successful careers in project management. And I took that time to train and mentor them in how to be project managers in the civilian world and industry. And then in turn, they worked for me for 40 hours a week and helped me to develop a lot of internal processes, like my proposal template, my sales process, my estimating templates. And so it was very, very beneficial. For me, it was a turning point having all those processes in place. And then there was also that added benefit that we were also impacting the veteran community. So myself, along with my participants in the study, have a strong affinity for staying closely connected to the military community. And I guess the award tomorrow. So the application period is going to be opened tomorrow. And this year is my first year I'll be taking over as the chair for that award. So I'll be leading the process, leading a committee, and selecting our winner. And then we will be providing the winner with, or the finalists with, travel to a conference. It's called Business to Battlefields, and it's in Texas in October, and we'll be handing out the award live and in person. And so we're really looking forward to that. Is there anything else that I forgot on that announcement?
Nope. Just everybody look for your email, and you've got 30 days to apply.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really want to thank you all. Oh, here we go. Do you have any recommendations for veterans looking to start a business? That is a great one. So me personally, yes, I have a ton of recommendations. And the first one is, first you have to decide what type of business is it, and then go looking for resources. I will warn you that there are too many resources out there. The Small Business Administration is great. It's amazing. There's a ton of information there in terms of starting your business. Is it an LLC, or is it a C Corp or an S Corp? So they can help you through that process. There's also something that's called the PTAC, the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. I don't know how I remember that, but the PTAC is another resource that you can use when starting a business. And they can help you again through that process is what kind of business do I need to register and what does that look like? Another recommendation I have is to talk with other business owners and learn their lessons. And finally, I'll say just jump off the cliff and just do it. It's funner that way, in my opinion.
And also too, Dixie, on our website under entrepreneurship on our site, you can fill out a form and I do a 30-minute call. And then to go a little bit further and then get you connected to a lot of the resources that Jennifer mentioned as well.
Yeah, Melissa has actually some very good and formal relationships with some of those resources. So take her up on that.
Very good. All right. Well, Jennifer, again, thank you so much. Very, very insightful. And thank you all for attending. And all of you will receive this link once we get it uploaded to YouTube. So thank you again, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Bye.